Thank you for joining us for today's webinar entitled Vitamin D, Fact and Fiction. We have an educational and entertaining session in store for you. And now, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Sanderhoff. Brian, the audience is yours.
Well, thank you, Becky. I appreciate that, and hopefully everybody is on and can hear me okay and that things are working well. First of all, thank you very much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. I'm very excited about the opportunity to communicate with people in this format, in this manner. It makes me feel very much like I'm back on the radio doing my radio show, which is kind of neat. And so we have this entire series actually scheduled out for the rest of this year and throughout the entire 2012 year. We'll be doing a webinar every month. Different topic. We'll be doing 2 webinars on the same topic live. We like to have that opportunity to give people the opportunity to, participate and give us feedback while we're doing it. And then, as Becky said, they are also recorded and will be on the website for anyone. So here's the deal for this one. Today we're talking about vitamin D, and we'll be doing it again on Thursday at 12 noon. And so if after listening to it today, you have some friends, relatives, whatever, that you think would make use of the information, then please refer them to go to that webinar if they want to listen to it live, or if not, sometime in the middle of the next week, this will be up on our website where then someone can listen to it at their convenience. And again, if you need to get in touch with me, please do so. You can do it right through the website. There's a contact me thing, or you can actually call us, and the phone number's all over the website as well. Part of my mission in life is to make sure that we are here to act as a resource for people, and so I want to make sure that that we are available. So we're going to talk about vitamin D, and I have to tell you that this may be the most important nutrient that anyone can take, and I think by the end of this webinar, you all will feel the same as well. And it's so simple to take. It's not very expensive, and it is so very effective at helping to address all sorts of health issues that we'll talk about today. So, the first question on my mind is, what is vitamin D? Well, I'd like to tell you it's not really a vitamin, even though we call it vitamin D. It's actually a pro-hormone, and what that means is that in the body, it gets converted into a very, very powerful hormone. It's good to note that practically every animal that does get exposed to sunlight actually makes vitamin D, and this should be a clue to how important it is if everyone that gets exposed to vitamin D needs it in one way or another. And in your body, what happens is vitamin D gets converted into a metabolite, which is called, as you see there, 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, also known as calcitriol. So another name for that, or another way to think about that, is calcitriol is actually activated vitamin D. And it has been said to have the ability to unlock a cell's DNA library. That is a very powerful statement and very important for you to understand that whole thing. So calcitriol, or activated vitamin D in your genes. I want to just say a few words about genetic expression and what that really means, what genetic expression is. Because right now we have families, we have family members, our parents, our grandparents that have certain diseases, and we walk around thinking, well, if I've got a family history of diabetes, that means I'm going to get diabetes as well. And it can be true, but it is not necessarily true, and it's really important to understand this. Our genes are more like a Star Trek episode. What they do is they give us different possible futures. Which future comes to pass depends on how we bathe our genes in our experiences: diet, exercise, lifestyle, maybe most importantly, coping mechanisms, how we deal with stress. And so this is a very big part of why vitamin D is so important, because it plays a role with genetic expression and a lot of different genes. Now, I don't know if you have heard of this. It's kind of hard not to have heard of it by now, but there's a thing called the human genome, and it's been this study that's been going on for, 10 or 12 years now, where scientifically we're starting to understand all of the genetic markers that are in humans. And, it's a tremendous amount of work, and what we're finding is that there are genes that are responsible for expressing our health in many different ways. And one of the interesting things about calcitriol is that it actually there are actually over 2,700 calcitriol binding sites on the human genome. What this means is that vitamin D plays a very important role in genetic expression, both positive or negative. About 2/3 of those genes, calcitriol actually turns on and activates them, and then about 1/3 of those genes, it dampens their expression. And so there are genes, for example, that will lead to inflammation, which is then a risk factor for all sorts of health conditions. And vitamin D has the ability to turn that gene off, meaning making less inflammation in your body, or vice versa, depending on on what's appropriate for the body. And it's also important to note that these binding sites are near genes involved in virtually every known major disease, and that's why vitamin D is so important for that. So where do we get our vitamin D from? First place is from sunlight, and it's really important to understand how this works, and also to understand that for how many billions of years we have been exposed to the sun. Some people may look at that fact and say to themselves, wow, maybe the sun is good for us, and maybe we're supposed to get exposure to it. And again, by the end of the talk today, hopefully you'll get that message as well, and understand that we should be getting more exposure to the sun just properly. So number one, we get our vitamin D from sunlight. We get it from exposure to a very specific kind of ultraviolet ray that comes from the sun, which is called ultraviolet B, or UVB. If you're getting full body exposure, and that's sort of defined as 40% of your body, you will start to make 1,000 international units of vitamin D within minutes of getting that exposure. And it's interesting to note that you can make 10,000 units of vitamin D in about half the time that it takes for your skin to start to turn pink. And so it doesn't mean that you have to get tanned to make your vitamin D, and in fact, you make your vitamin D much earlier than you start to get burned from the sun. And so that means that getting sun exposure is really, really important. So what factors are there that will influence how and if you make vitamin D from the sun? Well, first of all, the time of day is very important. When the sun is at a certain angle in the sky, the rays have to go through the atmosphere, including ozone, to get to the Earth, to reach you. And so when the sun is lower in the sky, those rays have to go through more ozone to be able to get to you, and by the time it gets to you, none of those UVB rays are there anymore and or available for you to make vitamin D on your skin. And so the time of day is very important. And what that means is that if you're going to get exposure to the sun that is actually going to make some vitamin D for you, generally you have to do it between 10 and 2, 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. The time of year is another factor. Now I should be showing my screen. Sorry about that, everybody. So the time of year is also very important, and it's the same rule of thumb. If you live in an area where, for instance, this time of year the sun is lower in the sky, and that happens as you get a higher latitude, then you're not getting exposure to the type of rays where you actually make vitamin D. And again, that latitude thing plays a role as well. So the more north you get, or the further you get away from the equator, the less likely you are to make vitamin D from exposure to the sun. Another one of those factors that influences whether you're making any vitamin D from your sun exposure has to do with your skin type. So basically, the darker that you are, the less likely you are to make vitamin D, or the longer it takes sun exposure-wise to make vitamin D. So here's an example of this, and I think this is kind of interesting. If you live in Miami and it's noon, and you are of a medium skin color, which is a common Caucasian, you will make 1,000 units of vitamin D in 6 minutes during the summer, and you'll make 1,000 units of vitamin D in 15 minutes during the winter. That's in Miami at noon. If you are darker skinned, typically African American, in the summer it'll take you 15 minutes to make that 1,000 units of vitamin D, or 29 minutes to make that same 1,000 units of vitamin D in the winter. So again, the darker skin you are, the more sun exposure it takes to make vitamin D. Here's another example. At noon in Boston in the summer, if you're, again, that medium skin, it takes about an hour to make 1,000 units of vitamin D. And if you're dark skin, it can take 2 hours to make that same 1,000 units. How about in the winter? Doesn't matter what skin type you are not making any vitamin D in Boston. Another factor is age. As you get older, you become less effective at making vitamin D from sun exposure. And so a 20-year-old will make vitamin D 4 times as effectively as a 60-year-old. Another major factor that plays a role with us making or not making vitamin D is sunscreen. And this is where we've made a big error in medicine and in our exposure to information from the media, because we have all been scared into becoming walking, talking shade, basically. We are fearful of the sun, and we shouldn't be. The sun is very important for general health, and especially for this whole vitamin D story. What we shouldn't do is overexpose ourselves to the sun and get burnt. That's when we start to do damage to the skin. But actually, just as many studies show lack of exposure to the sun being a factor or a determining factor for skin cancers, including melanoma, as overexposure to the sun. So this whole sunscreen thing that we do, here's the kicker. SPF of only 8 will decrease 95% of vitamin D production. And no one uses just SPF 8 anymore. We all use 20 and 30 and 40 and 90 or whatever. And so basically you use that stuff and you wear clothes that are treated. You're not getting any exposure, not getting any vitamin D making exposure to the sun. I also just wanted to take a quick word or say a quick word about the tanning beds as well, because if it is a properly used tanning bed, that is another way to ensure that you are making vitamin D from exposure to the sun on your skin, and that is probably the preferred way. But there are people who don't do tanning appropriately, and it's a very expensive method of sort of replacing the sun. So I'm not the biggest fan of relying on our tanning to do that either. So how about foods? Do we get appreciable amounts of vitamin D from our foods? Well, here's just a couple quick examples. If you're getting 3.5 ounces of salmon, you're getting 360 units of vitamin D. Almost 2 ounces of sardines will give you about 250 units. People oftentimes, when I do talks, raise their hand and say, wait, milk has vitamin D in it. Well, first of all, you have to understand that milk does not come with vitamin D. It's actually fortified. And if you drink a cup of milk, you're getting a whopping 98 units of vitamin D. And I say whopping with tongue-in-cheek because as we get into this, you're going to find that I'm a big proponent of taking much higher doses of vitamin D. And then in egg, if you eat an egg, that only has 20 units of vitamin D. And so really, food is not a reasonable source of getting your vitamin D as well. And so that's when we come to the idea of actually supplementing with vitamin D. And far and away, that's the most important way that we can get our vitamin D, is by supplementing with it. You have to take a supplement. The vitamin D comes in a couple different forms. There's vitamin D3, that's also known as cholecalciferol, and that is the natural form of vitamin D. And then there's vitamin D2, which is also known as ergocalciferol, and that's the synthetic form of vitamin D. There's a little, just because, I'm a little biochemistry nerd, I like to put up a little biochemistry look at it. So that's what vitamin D2 and vitamin D3 look like. You can see that they're very similar chemically, except for this one little group right here of some molecules and a double bond right here. So that plays a huge role in how your body uses vitamin D. And vitamin D3, which is the natural vitamin D, your body uses much more effectively than vitamin D2. And when I say uses effectively, you have to understand that, again, this is a pro-hormone, and so what your body does is it takes the vitamin D and tries to convert it into the calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D in your body, or the active hormone. And your body can more efficiently convert vitamin D3 into that than it can vitamin D2. So again, there's the vitamin D3 and there's the vitamin D2. It comes in a variety of different forms and sources. And so you'll find vitamin D3 on the market in all sorts of ways. You'll find it in capsules, you'll find it in chewable tablets, you'll find it in liquid forms, you'll find it in drop forms. And I'm a big fan of any one of those depending on what's appropriate for you to use. They're very small gel caps generally, and that's what I usually have people use, but there's some people who don't want to swallow capsules, and or if we're talking about using this for children, even babies, there are vitamin D drops that come in all sorts of strengths that we oftentimes use for people. The source of vitamin D in the industry comes from two places, either from cod liver oil or from lanolin. Lanolin is sort of the oil that gets secreted on the skin of sheep. And that far and away is the largest source of vitamin D in the supplement industry. And I don't see many supplements out there that exclusively are coming from cod liver oil. Now, you can take cod liver oil as a supplement, and but I don't see purified vitamin D supplements that are out there. So then the question becomes, how much is enough to supplement with vitamin D? And a typical dose would be anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 international units of vitamin D every day. 1,000 to 10,000. That's typical. I will tell you that the RDA of vitamin D, the recommended daily allowance, is how much vitamin D you would need to avoid getting rickets. And it's not that much. It's 600 or 800 international units. But as we'll discuss a little bit later, our needs and our ability to raise our blood level of vitamin D requires much higher dosing than that. And remember that if you went out and got exposure to the sun properly for a period of time, your body would make 10,000 units of vitamin D. And so some people would draw the conclusion that that's probably very safe, and in fact it is. I want to talk a little bit about those vitamin D blood tests and how we determine whether you have enough vitamin D. Really, the best way to know, especially if you're going to dose in higher dosages, we want to make sure that you're reaching your goals as far as what that is, and you're not overshooting your goals for those blood levels. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. So I don't know if anyone has experience having their vitamin D level tested by their blood, but I can tell you that it is becoming more and more common in medicine, and it is probably one of the most important blood tests that you can do. I'm going to say that again. It is one of the most important, most useful blood tests that you can have done. As far as your general health goes and all sorts of risk factors for cardiovascular disease, for immune function, for autoimmune diseases, for all sorts of cancers, knowing your vitamin D level is more important than knowing your cholesterol or maybe even your blood sugar. And so everybody should be having these tested. You should ask your doctor to test it for you if they're not already routinely doing it. Some doctors do it routinely. Some of them say, oh, no, you don't need it unless you have osteoporosis, which is not true. And so when you go to get your test done, you're going to get a number. And the reference range on that test is going to say anywhere from 28 to 30 to 100 is normal. That 28 to 30 is low, and then 100 is high, and anywhere in the middle is good. The way that these reference ranges are determined is really just based on all of the blood tests that a particular lab does. That's why you'll see slightly different reference ranges for different labs. So if you go to LabCorp, you might see it's only 28 to 100, and if you go to Quest, it might be 30 to 100. And the reason is because what they're doing is basically just taking a bell-shaped curve of all the people they test, and they test slightly different populations. But here's the big question. If everybody is vitamin D deficient, then the reference ranges are going to be skewed to the deficient side, and that's the case. We actually want to see our blood levels more in the 50 to 60 to 70 range. The way it's measured is in nanograms per milliliter, but it's really just the number that you need to know. And definitely want to get that range into the 50 to 60 to 70 range, and you'll see the reasons why in a second. Okay, so then the question comes, well, how much is too much? Is it possible to get too much vitamin D? And the answer is yes. It is possible to get too much vitamin D from supplemental forms. It is not possible to get too much from exposure to the sun. Your body has a mechanism that when you're making it in your body and you get exposure to the sun, even when it's proper exposure, even if it's overexposure, there's a mechanism that stops the production of vitamin D at basically about 10,000 units. But I have to tell you that from supplementation, toxicity is very, very rare. And the statement I always tell people is, you almost have to try to hurt yourself to get too much. So when you are supplementing, you are bypassing that mechanism. All published cases of vitamin D toxicity in the medical literature involve dosages greater than 40,000 units a day for some period of time. I want to explain a couple terms to you real quickly. The safe upper limit of a nutrient is the amount determined to be safe that you can take without risk for the majority of the population. And for vitamin D, that's a blood level of 100 nanograms per milliliter. So when you get that blood test, supposedly the safe upper limit is 100. Another term, the toxicity threshold of a nutrient is the amount beyond which symptoms of toxicity can manifest. And for vitamin D, it's a blood level that's from 200 to 250 or above. And there are some animal studies showing blood levels up to 400 not showing any toxicity. But if your blood level was 200 or above, we might start to get a little bit concerned about it. The wide spread between the safe upper limit and the toxicity threshold is a clear demonstration of the degree of safety with which supplementing with vitamin D, exists. What are the symptoms of toxicity? If you were to get too much vitamin D in your blood, the first thing that would happen is you'd start to see increased calcium in your urine. It's also called hypercalciuria. The next thing would be increased calcium in the blood. That's called hypercalcemia. If you were to get these sorts of things, you may get symptoms like nausea and vomiting, decreased appetite, muscle weakness, weight loss, heart rhythm issues. The proper response, if someone was taking vitamin D and they were concerned to know if they were toxic, is to get a blood level done. Because you can take vitamin D, you can have those symptoms, and obviously nausea and vomiting can be related to a million different things. It's not just, all right, I started taking vitamin D, so I must be vitamin D toxic. The proper response is to get that vitamin D test. And if your blood levels are above 200, then it could be that you're getting too much vitamin D and you need to calm down on your dosage. And I can tell you that very few examples of that in the literature. As I said, you have to try to hurt yourself to get vitamin D. And then if your blood levels are below 200, it's not vitamin D toxicity. And then we look for other reasons why you might be getting those symptoms if it's related to vitamin D. And those other reasons could be an underlying magnesium deficiency, which I'll explain to you in a second. Could be something called vitamin D hypersensitivity. Or there are certain other physical ailments. You could have a problem with your parathyroid. You could have a condition that's called sarcoidosis. And in those conditions, we're a little bit more cautious about how much vitamin D we supplement with, and I'll explain why. I see that we do have a question from Janine, and she wanted to know if vitamin D should be taken at night. You can take it at night. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's no reason to either. I take my vitamin D first thing in the morning with my morning supplements with breakfast, and I do recommend that my patients do that as well, but there's no reason to. The issue here is consistency. You want to make sure that you are taking enough vitamin D every single day. That really is the key. And thanks for that question, Janine. Appreciate that. So what are the health conditions that vitamin D impacts? Well, unless you've been living under a rock, you know about bone structure, and that's why doctors have started to prescribe vitamin D for their patients, because they realize that it plays a role with helping the body get calcium from the stomach into the bones. And so oftentimes if someone has osteopenia or osteoporosis, osteopenia is the beginning of that process, bone thinning basically, doctors will start to prescribe vitamin D. And there's even a prescription medicine, which is 50,000 units of vitamin D every day. And we don't recommend that one because, one, it's a synthetic vitamin D, and it's a high dose that you take once a week or once every 2 weeks, and we would prefer to see 5,000 or 10,000 units taken every single day. The body will respond better to that. So that's bone structure. There's immune function as well, and that plays a very, as you'll see in this next slide in a second, vitamin D plays a very important function with immune, not just in helping you fight off against invaders, including cancers and viruses and bacteria and that kind of stuff, but also autoimmune diseases. It is a common occurrence that people that have autoimmune disease commonly have low vitamin D levels. Now, that's not necessarily to say that if you have MS or rheumatoid arthritis or some sort of autoimmune disease, that if you start taking high doses of vitamin D, that it's going to make it go away. But certainly, as far as prevention, and again, this comes to that genetic expression thing. If you have a family member that, or a genetic predisposition towards some sort of autoimmune disease, you taking vitamin D, keeping your levels higher, clearly will make it less likely for you to get that disease. I like to talk about the flu in particular because no question about it, you getting your vitamin D levels up right now, up into the 50, 60, 70 range, will make you much less susceptible to getting the flu. And if you do get the flu, you take high doses of vitamin D. And when I say high doses, I'm talking about 25 or 30,000 units every morning for a few days. You will get the flu, you know, the severity and the longevity of that flu inside of you will be much less. If I wake up in the morning and I feel that little tickle in my throat or that little cough that, you know, people get, or the beginning of a sinus thing that you know is maybe the beginning of something, you start taking high doses of vitamin D for a few days and it just kicks it out completely. And even if you don't feel those symptoms, if you've been exposed to the flu or some sort of virus and you know it, meaning that you're at a party and then, you know, people there had gotten sick, if you start taking high doses of vitamin D, lots of times it will help you avoid ever getting that. So this is a really cool slide that I wanted to show you that goes over vitamin D serum levels, blood levels, and certain conditions and or the likelihood of getting those conditions when you have your blood level above a certain point. So if you look at that all cancer one, it says if you have your blood level above 50, then, oh, sorry, the all cancer ones is if you have your blood level in the 40s, you're 35% less likely to get cancer overall. If you look at breast cancer in particular, if you get the blood level over 50, 52, you're 83% less likely to get breast cancer. Same thing with ovarian cancer and colon cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. How about type 1 diabetes? Again, that's sort of an autoimmune thing. And practically every other disease. And this goes back to that whole thing with the genetics and how vitamin D plays a role with positive genetic expression almost regardless of what your family history or family tendencies are. Really, really important to understand. So there are some cofactors that are needed to optimize vitamin D usage, and this is really very, very interesting. So one of them is magnesium. I have to tell you that magnesium deficiency in the United States is common, and that some estimates are actually that more than, the high 80% of us are deficient in magnesium. This happens because of our diets and the foods that we choose to eat and the standard American diet. It also happens because of our agricultural practices in this country. We use the same land over and over again for the same crop, and we replenish the land with phosphorus and nitrogen, which makes plants grow bigger, but we become deficient in other nutrients in the soil, which then makes the foods that we eat, even if we think we're eating fresh foods, deficient in those nutrients as well. And magnesium is one of those. And in fact, back in the 70s, the government had identified the fact that we were becoming magnesium deficient. If you were to get it from your diet, you get it from nuts and seeds and spinach and other greens. All fruits and vegetables, to some degree, have some magnesium in it. This is why it's important. It is a cofactor in all of the enzymes that help metabolize vitamin D into calcitriol, which again is the activated vitamin D. So you can have low levels of vitamin D, and it could be not because you're not getting enough vitamin D, but because you don't have enough of these other cofactors to convert it properly. So I've had patients who have been supplementing with 5,000 units of D every day, of D3, the proper one, and do their blood test, and their levels don't come up appreciably. There can be some other reasons for that. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and so if you have a lot of excess body fat, sometimes you have to be over-aggressive in saturating that fat with vitamin D before you can get blood levels to elevate. But short of those things, and increasing dosages don't show that the blood levels are going up, then we start to look at some of these other cofactors, and we start supplementing with magnesium, and then all of a sudden you start to see those vitamin D levels go up. If you do have a magnesium deficiency, sometimes when you start taking vitamin D, you can start to show some symptoms like irritability or insomnia or headache or fatigue. And so if you do start supplementing, if you've never supplemented with a high-dose vitamin D before, and you do start supplementing with it, and all of a sudden you're noticing you're not sleeping well, you're getting headaches or whatever, that may be an indication that you need extra magnesium, and you start supplementing with some magnesium. Some people say, wait a second, I'll just get my my magnesium level checked in my blood. And I have to tell you that that's basically useless. And that's because the body stores magnesium in a lot of different places in your body, in your bones, in your certain tissues, and in your blood serum, which is what you measure with blood tests. Only 1% of your body's magnesium is stored there. And so getting a blood test saying what your magnesium level is not a useful way of determining a magnesium deficiency. Another cofactor is vitamin K. And the reason this is important is because vitamin K dependent proteins in the body act as potent inhibitors of vascular calcifications. So think about this now. One of the things that vitamin D does, it helps the body absorb calcium. The importance of vitamin K is it then helps your body use that calcium appropriately. If you absorb calcium and it's not getting into the bones, or you're not doing something to support your vasculature, you may actually make it more likely to get hardening of the arteries, and that's where vitamin K plays such an important role in avoiding that. And so the interesting thing about vitamin K is that even though it is fat soluble, the body does not store it, so you have to get it on a daily basis. Also important to note is that the need for vitamin K can increase with aging, and so the older you get, the more you may need vitamin K. Whether you should supplement with it or not is a different story, and there are some people who are big proponents of supplementing with vitamin K, with pills. I would prefer to see us get it from our diet first. And basically you get vitamin K from green leafy vegetables. And so again, I said you should get it every single day. And so having a salad a day with mixed greens in it and using different greens at different times a year to your taste is a great way of ensuring that you're getting enough vitamin K. I'll also tell you that if you have an imbalance of the good bacteria in your gut, that may also interfere with your body's ability. Some of your vitamin K actually comes from the bacteria that lives inside of you. And so if you've been on antibiotics recently, or if you are showing other symptoms of gut dysbiosis, which means an imbalance of the bacteria in your gut, then taking a probiotic, a good bacteria formula, will not only fix your gut issues, but they'll also play a role with calcium, with vitamin K, with your body ultimately being able to use vitamin D appropriately. Two other nutrients that I just want to mention as cofactors are zinc and boron. Zinc plays a role with vitamin D's ability to influence genes. So again, we talked about the human genome, and we talked about all of the vitamin D receptors that are present on those more than 2,700 sites that are all very close to genes that affect all sorts of health. Zinc plays a role with the vitamin D's ability to bind to those receptor sites appropriately. You get zinc from a lot of different sources, including animal proteins, where it's a much more usable source or form than you would get from grains. You can get zinc from grains as well, but grains also contain an ingredient called a phytate, which can bind to zinc. And so grains are not as good of a source as animal proteins are. So if you're a vegetarian and you don't eat any animal protein, then you may want to consider supplementing with some extra zinc to make sure that you're getting enough in a form that your body can use. Another nutrient is boron. And boron influences the enzymes that play a role in converting vitamin D, again, into its active form. And you get boron from nuts and seeds. And so one of the things that you may consider is, making sure that you're getting nuts and seeds and legumes and lots of fruits and vegetables in your diet. If you want to supplement with, all of these nutrients to make sure that you're getting enough, consider a bone mineral formula. And so a bone mineral formula would have calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, boron, strontium, vitamin K, all of those good things that incidentally, I've just talked about that are important with vitamin D as well. And so what we would consider a bone mineral formula may also be important for all of these other functions, including cardiovascular and immune function and anti-cancer and all of that stuff. A good bone mineral formula that we use often in our practice here is one that's called Osteo Plus by a company called Progena. I really like that one. It's a good dosage and it's a good product. So if you do have some questions, if there are some things that you're wondering that I didn't address for you, then now would be a good time to type them in, and those will be forwarded to me and I'll answer them. But in conclusion, one thing to understand is that vitamin D is so important to your health. So important. It's because it plays such an important role in genetic expression, in making you be able to have your parents' genes and then be able to not suffer from the same sort of chronic diseases that they suffered from. Nothing could be more important than vitamin D. Another way to say that is that maybe this is the most important anti-aging nutrient that's out there. You know, I teach a course at Johns Hopkins in their Odyssey program about a holistic approach to anti-aging, and the first sentence out of my mouth when I teach this course is there's no such thing as anti-aging. If you're not aging, you're dead. But there is such a thing as graceful aging, and I would say that there are two really vital nutrients to seeing that happen for you, and one of them is vitamin D, and one of them is fish oil as well. Let's see. Again, you have to try to hurt yourself to get too much vitamin D, and so it's fair to make that assumption until otherwise proven. And again, the way to prove it, you know, for sure, is through the blood test. Let's see. And then the last thing is that it's cheap and it's easy. The vitamin D, we have our own brand, and again, when you're taking vitamin D, you want to make sure two things. Number one, it's vitamin D3, and then you want to make sure that it's inexpensive. And so the vitamin D that we use here for most of our patients is actually our own brand. It's the Well-Being label. And so a bottle of 100 5,000 unit capsules, I don't know, it's you know, less than $10. And so that's a 3-month supply. Nothing could be less expensive for you. Okay, so starting to get some questions in here, and let me address those questions. And again, let me say thank you so much for participating in this. I really like this. I would love your feedback. You know, after the webinar, if you have some comments for me about the way we do it or anything that we can do to improve it, or if you just absolutely love it, then email me and let me know, because I really do appreciate that feedback, and it helps us make this more useful for people. So, okay, Janine wants to know if vitamin D can help a person who has sarcoidosis. And actually, you have to be careful here, because sarcoidosis is a condition where you're sort of predisposed to having high levels of calcium, and vitamin D can increase those levels. And so we have to be more gentle with our dosing, and we have to monitor more closely blood levels of vitamin D to make sure that they're not getting too high, because that's somebody who can have a problem with those levels easier than somebody else. Let's see, another question. What is the name of the bone mineral formula again? The bone mineral formula that we use, often, now there's a lot of them. I mean, there's 3 or 4 that we use commonly in our practice. The one I like a lot is called Osteo Plus, and you can find it on our website. We have it, I think it's around $14, 14 and change for 180 tablets, and generally I have people take 4 a day, so it's a month-and-a-half supply. And it's a good, complete bone mineral formula. I like it a lot because, one, it has a good form of calcium that the body absorbs very efficiently. It has a high dose of magnesium. Lots of times with supplements, you'll see twice as much calcium as magnesium, and that's not probably optimal because we get enough calcium, we don't get enough magnesium. And so that one would be a good one. So it's called Osteo Plus. Let's see, another question. Lori wants to know if there's a point where you can overdose on vitamin D. There is a point, Lori, but again, you have to try to hurt yourself to be able to do that. I've gone through the medical literature, and the only, you know, really report in the medical literature that I've seen that, you know, that is legitimate was a guy who was taking 250,000 units every day for months at a time. And after a month of doing that, his blood level went too high, and again, the result of that is high blood calcium level, which can then lead to other problems, including, death if it's taken to its extreme. But I have to point out that once it was determined with that guy, that particular person, he stopped the vitamin D supplementation, and the condition completely reversed itself. And so, far and away, vitamin D supplementation is safe and it's effective, and you can be really aggressive. Again, if you were to go out and get proper exposure to the sun, you would make 10,000 units of vitamin D. And so I am very comfortable having patients supplement with 10,000 units a day, and we do their blood test to make sure that it's an appropriate dosage for them. And that really is the best way to do that. So I don't see any other questions left, and so I'm going to end it in a second. Again, I want to thank everybody. Next, again, we will be doing this same webinar again on Thursday at 12 noon, and people can sign up by going to the website. Sometime next week, the recording of this will be up on the website, so then people can listen to it along with the PowerPoint presentation and watch it any time that they'd like. This is the schedule of what's coming up in December and January and February. All good information. And again, one, thanks for participating, and two, give me some feedback. I'd love to hear back from you and let me know how you enjoyed the seminar and the webinar and anything that we can do to make it better. And I also have to thank Becky for all of her hard work in preparation for this with the preparation of the PowerPoint for me as well as hosting it today. So Becky, I'm going to hand it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. I hope you guys had a great webinar, and if you have any questions, please feel free to look at the webinar again on www.wellbeinggps.com. Thanks, and have a great day.